And so we finally got an Eternals trailer, or at least a teaser, in which a grateful world finally received the promise of a Marvel movie that looks and feels decidedly different from most of the other Marvel movies, and promptly proceeded to complain that it didn't look enough like other Marvel movies, in terms of being desaturated, too ponderous, and I guess at some point we all decided we wanted every trailer for a movie like this to just be the characters introducing themselves and their backstory like we're watching Cats.
Puss in Spats!
And also, apparently people are already having trouble with the whole, if the gimmick is they've been around forever, why didn't we see them during any of the other big stuff, or even when all that Thanos stuff happened? Which, okay, yeah, it is a good question, guys. I mean, that's the kind of question where if they did a movie that might answer it or give it some context, I would probably go see that movie. Whatever, I think it looks interesting. The November drop date, pre-release hype about how different it is, and deliberately off-model first look all seem calculated in terms of Marvel wanting this positioned as their version of a weird, quasi-art house blockbuster, at least in the visual sense, because somebody got a taste of almost winning Best Picture that one time, and now I guess they're gonna keep swinging. As for what the hell any of this means, or what it's even going to be, I can't say I'm surprised that any version of 99% of the planet's first glimpse of this specific franchise came off bewildering to so many, despite how actually basic it looks once you stop trying to find Marvel connections and just realize this is just gonna kinda be Ancient Aliens the movie.
Aliens. Ancient astronaut theorists believe the answers can be found not only in the Bible, but encoded within the genetic blueprint of the human body.
Our survival was ensured by extraterrestrials.
Strikingly similar man-made structures exist here on Earth.
An enormous keyhole shape.
A young woman becomes impregnated by a powerful god who comes to a room through a keyhole.
Osiris in his resurrected form was portrayed as a pillar that clearly resembles a modern-day Tesla coil.
Could the triune nature of God, as described in the New Testament, also exist in all of mankind?
It turns out that it's very clear it comes in clusters of 3.
The number 3 is the key to our DNA language.
We live in a precarious point.
They, in fact, have a vested interest in our survival. We are their direct offspring.
I mean, even someone who has at least 2 jobs now, both in part depending on me knowing this shit, I've found the Eternals difficult to parse, both in terms of what they're supposed to be about and why I'm supposed to care what they're about.
Oh, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Who are all you people?
Of all Jack Kirby's inscrutable sci-fi mythology gonzo creations of the 70s, they're probably the most inscrutable and definitely the least carefully managed over the years, rather obviously existing in the main sense as a place to rehook his New Gods idea drip feed after leaving it unfinished at DC, and continuing after him mainly as a tub of flex paste for Marvel to seal up the disjointed pieces of every other property's creation mythology. They are, putting it bluntly, an endless mess as a continuity and a character roster, but there is undeniably material there to be mined for a movie, otherwise why would they be making it other than as a near grotesque display of one's arrogance that literally anything they put their logo on will be a success. So, okay, I'll try and explain what the hell is going on here, or at least where it came from.
Hold on to your butts.
So, to start at the start, Jack Kirby, as everyone probably knows, but just in case, was the guy who was most responsible along with Stan Lee for the foundations of what we now call the Marvel Universe, i.e. Lee did a lot of the writing, and Kirby did a lot of the drawing. What gets lost in some of the details is that everyone was kind of contributing the throwing shit at the wall part of that era, and Kirby was also a big idea man as well, and a lot of his bigger ideas tied back to a lifelong fascination with what we now think of as the aforementioned Ancient Aliens theory, but back then was mainly called Chariots of the Gods after a book by Eric von Daniken, and also the Ancient Astronaut Hypothesis, the theory that extraterrestrial visitors had made contact with human beings in ancient times, that certain unexplained phenomena in human evolution were the work of alien interference, and that mythological figures like gods, angels, demons, and superhuman heroes were actually accounts of real encounters with alien beings.
I have to ask the question, is it possible that Osiris was not some type of biological entity, but perhaps he was some type of a machine or a robot?
Oh, Osiris, can we have a word with you?
Now, this is a very popular pseudoscience thing at the time, the early 60s into the mid-70s, especially with sci-fi and comics writers and not just Kirby. It's all over Marvel's original 60s material as both handwaves for their own story-to-story inconsistencies about using mythic figures, and especially as the rationale behind Thor's Asgardian mythos not aligning completely with existing Norse mythology, and both the Inhumans and their occasional cosmic stuff. Now, at a certain point, Kirby got so into the idea of creating his own cosmic cosmology based on these concepts concepts, he pitched Marvel on effectively blowing up the Thor pantheon and introducing a whole new stable of freshly imagined god characters, which Marvel passed on. So when Kirby left in the early 70s and took up with rival DC Comics, the big unifying text of the self-created project he did as his main focus became an expanded version of that idea called the New Gods, which whole other thing, but short version, it was big ol' space opera, and it's where Darkseid comes from.
Oh. Oh. Oh.
Anyway, the Kirby New Gods mega project came to sort of an incomplete cult fave, critics loved, readers didn't exactly know what to make of, and at DC, ultimately, as a writer, Kirby was a great artist, and he eventually made his way back to Marvel for a spell and set up a new series to continue exploring a lot of those same ideas, this time streamlined into a central set of characters in a single series but with only minimal initial connection to the goings-on of the broader Marvel Universe continuity. This was the Eternals. But before we get directly into that, quick before setup, see, before Kirby left Marvel, he did get to pump a bunch of his more explicit ancient astronaut fixation into the backstory of he and Stan Lee's earliest, less popular Marvel creation, the Inhumans, as mentioned before, which... No, I am not explaining the backstory of the Inhumans again, but the relevant point is they're a secret society populated by a race of superhuman weirdos, and when it came time to eventually sketch out their bigger backstory, the deal became that they have their powers and other weird shit because they were created by the Kree, once again that is the blue aliens Captain Marvel used to be with, doing genetic experiments on cavemen way back in the day. Also, during the same period, we're in the early to mid-70s by now, another Marvel writer named Jim Starlin, who is himself very into playing around with big cosmic space business but on a whole different wavelength, created a new supervillain character called Thanos, initially to be the antagonist to a new hero called Drax the Destroyer. Maybe you've heard of both of those names before somewhere.
I understood that reference.
Anywho, something everyone noticed even back then was that Thanos looked and kinda sometimes functioned similarly to Darkseid, the main villain from Kirby's New Gods comics from DC, and there are varying accounts as to how intentional that similarity was or wasn't meant to be, but yeah, it was a thing. At the starting point though, Thanos and all the other cosmic outer space Marvel stuff didn't really connect to the Eternals more than tangentially sharing the same universe, and they rarely interacted, and not only because, spoiler alert, the Eternals, like the New Gods, also didn't last long or get initially popular enough for that to really be an option. But, put a pin in that, we will eventually come back to it. But at this point, Thanos was called the Mad Titan because he was from planet Titan, and that was his race. Titans, or Titanians.
Tell me his name again.
Comics are weird.
But okay, the basic setup for Kirby's original The Eternals narrative, which ran for 19 issues and ended with its ongoing storyline unfinished, opens in the then present and reveals the bigger picture of what's going on here. In the simplest terms, it starts with these big old bastards, the Celestials. They're giant alien gods from space, not beings who get mistaken for gods like Thor. These are basically the actual gods in terms of being all-powerful, supergiant cosmic beings that run the universe, create planets, dictate the ebb and flow of life and evolution, etc. These are the big guys. Their leader is even just called the One Above All. In the MCU, you've already seen at least one in a recording in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Observe. These carriers can use this stone to mow down entire civilizations like wheat in a field.
There's a little pea coming out of me right now.
Speaking of which, the decapitated alien skull that's now the Nowhere mining colony, that's supposed to be a Celestial's head, and Ego the Living Planet described himself as being a Celestial in Guardians 2.
I'm what's called a Celestial, sweetheart.
A celestial like a god?
Small G, son.
So we're probably going to get more flexible about this on the movie side. But when Kirby started it out, they were big-ass, weird-looking armored gods, and at some point in the ancient past, one of their many cosmic science projects was experimenting on the DNA of early hominids on Earth, ultimately creating a Goldilocks porridge situation of three distinct humanoid races. The Deviants, who are superhumans that look like scary monsters, the Eternals, who are superhumans that are conventionally attractive, and, just regular humans. The Deviants want to hurt and kill the regular humans because they are ugly and therefore evil. The Eternals want to protect humans because they are pretty and therefore good. The Celestials, being gods, just kind of go, alright, this should be something. We'll be back every couple millennia to see how it's working out, and they take off. Except for one big old one, which they leave underground and is like sleeping or dreaming, and there's a few others scattered. We're going to come back to them. There's a few other details and complications, but those are the basics. The Eternals and Deviants bop around the margins of human history, being either mistaken for or actively impersonating our various gods and devils, respectively, a couple times. The Celestials come back and do some big, heavy cleanup of various deviant-adjacent civilizations, and that's the stuff we remember as the myths of lost continents like Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria.
How long ago did you say this was?
Thousands of years ago.
you get the picture. In Kirby's main modern-day Marvel storyline, the Celestials are making another return called the Fourth Host, and the Deviants have reemerged with a long-term scheme to get humanity judged with a big cosmic thumbs down by causing all kinds of havoc and counting on us to, react in fear of both them and the giant judgmental space gods. So the Eternals reveal themselves to the world and start actively fighting back to prevent this, with the implication that they might have to at some point even stand against the Celestials themselves to do so if it came to that, because they've decided they like humans. I guess we're charming or something. So yeah, lots of big ideas and plenty of room for Kirby to think up and draw amazingly weird space stuff, but not necessarily that convoluted. There's an outline there, sure, but combine the esoteric plotting and overall resistance to any but the most threadbare mainline Marvel crossover potential in Kirby's own, again, esoteric tendencies as both a storyteller and dialogue writer.
Fade out. Title. The end. Question mark.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's... Good job. Good job.
Do you have any thoughts? Notes?
No, I just enjoyed it. That's my note, Please write more.
Seems a little insincere.
But nonetheless, it's definitely a fascinating look at one of the great creative minds of the comics genre, essentially trying to self-reboot the entire concept of both superheroes and the monomyth into a streamlined single property.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
In any case, these would be the main heroes of Kirby's original Eternals run, and so far as anyone can tell, the corresponding main characters of the upcoming film, who appear to have at least something like the same origin and background, though circumstance looks quite different, and also they've shaken up the gender and ethnicity makeup a lot. So let's do that. Just to save time, traditionally, Eternals all have the same powers. They're super strong, super fast, super everything else. Most of them can fly, they can throw lasers at you, most of them can also do psychic and telepathic stuff, some of them are better at certain aspects than others, but in this case it's really more about the attitude, fashion, and skill specialization than it is like an X-Men situation. Oh, and also any group of more than 3 can kind of psychic Voltron themselves together into a single composite power entity called a Unimind to accomplish even more powerful stuff.
I'm a gigantic brain!
Most ungentlemanlike.
Anyway. Ikaris is typically the leader. He's big, he's blonde, he's got royal blood and daddy issues coming out of his ears, and he can teleport, which is not one of the things all of the others can do. Richard Madness playing him in the movie, he's the one who suggests that he could maybe be the leader of the Avengers in the trailer.
So now that Captain Rogers and Iron Man are both gone, who do you think's gonna lead the Avengers?
I could lead them.
The name similarity to the Greek myth of Icarus is deliberate, and yes, the idea is that the Minotaur was one of the monsters, and that was really a deviant. Ikaris defeated it, and people have mixed up the story a bit since it happened. See also? Ajax was apparently the inspiration for the Greek hero Ajax, and while I don't know that they'll keep that for the movie, I kinda want them to, because the role has been reimagined to be played by Salma Hayek, and I'd really like to see them make that work somehow. Athena is the character Angelina Jolie is playing in the movie, and yeah, this is where the cute mythology naming and the kinda not but also yes place in Marvel continuity the Eternals were originally meant to occupy starts to become kind of a pain in the ass. See, the idea Kirby was aiming at is this is where we got Athena from, but by that point in Marvel continuity, the quote-unquote real Athena and all the other Olympian gods were established to exist as a race of godlike aliens a la the Asgardians and Thor. So eventually it got cleared up that the Eternals and the Olympians both existed, and they just kind of traded places sometimes to, I guess, mess with people. And before you say, well, the movie can just skip that whole business, right? We already know Russell Crowe is playing Zeus in Thor: Love and Thunder, so I guess no, we can't. Oh, and in the comics, it's a thing that she keeps causing problems by hooking up with deviants. Not sure that's going to be a thing in the movie. Circe is the illusionist and other stuff that resembles basically witchcraft of the Eternals, and she's probably gonna end up being the actual female lead of the movie, where she's being played by Gemma Chan, because the trailer is playing up a romance thing with Ikaris, but more recent comics continuity man-friend Black Knight is also a character in the film. That's who Kit Harington is playing.
Oh shit, here we go again.
He's not an Eternal, he's just a regular dude, but he's got a magic sword, so I bet that's a story. Gilgamesh! Oh, okay, so in the comics this guy was originally and still off and on called the Forgotten One, but as part of the movie versions, by now very apparent hard lean into the ancient aliens business, he was also either the actual or occasional stand-in for the historical and mythological figure Gilgamesh of ancient Sumer. In any case, the movie is calling him Gilgamesh, I'm gonna go with Gilgamesh. He's pretty much the big unstoppable, beat the shit out of everybody Eternal, so good on them for casting Korean star Ma Dong-seok. Not familiar with his work? get familiar with his work. This guy rules. Phastos is the weapons and tools guy, hence the mnemonic allusion to Hephaestus from Greek mythology. That's pretty straightforward. The great Brian Tyree Henry has the role in the movie, and supposedly this version of Phastos will also be our first out gay male superhero in the MCU, with actor Hans Sleeman playing Phastos' human husband in the contemporary portion of the story. Cool! Makari runs faster than the other Eternals do, so pretty damn fast, hence name sounds like Mercury, same basic mythology connections as the others apply. At one point, Marvel also retconned one of their long-forgotten Golden Age speedster heroes, the Hurricane, to have actually been this guy all along. In the film version, Makari has been rewritten as a female character being played by Lauren Ridloff, making her the first deaf Marvel heroine. That's pretty cool. Sprite is complicated, and for whatever reason, the Celestials said, you know what, let's leave one of these permanently a child physically, that ought to be a thing. And as you might expect, Sprite is kinda fucked up as a result. I have to imagine that any of the Eternals are going to be bad or morally ambiguous. This name jumps right to the top of the list. Leah McHugh is playing a female Sprite in the film, but the character has been depicted as both female and male, along with being both good and evil in the comics, and also apparently human mythology's inspiration for every trickster demon character, from Pan to Peter Pan to just generic hobgoblins, leprechauns. You know, it actually just occurred to me, I don't think there are any leprechauns in the MCU yet. Should there be? I think so. Kingo, full name Kingo Sunan, is pretty much the reverse Johnny Cage. His version of hiding out among humanity was to become an action movie star in Japan, famous for convincingly playing samurai warriors because he'd, been there. In the movie version, he has been reconceived as being a Bollywood film and music star from India who'll be played by Kumail Nanjiani. That should be fun. Druig is Icarus' cousin, also known as the Lord of Flames and Nightmares. Hell of a title if you can get it. What's interesting is Druig isn't really one of the good guys traditionally, despite being apparently aligned as such in the movie. In the comics, he's one of the Eternals who goes kinda bad and tries to amass power for evil. He was set up as the main villain of the second story arc, just as Kirby's original run was abruptly cut short. He's being played by Barry Kagan in the film, so guess we'll see where that's going.
Families can be tough.
And those are the good guys, we assume. As for their enemies, well, the deviants are numerous and ill-defined, since they can and often just are any monster or sufficiently ugly strong person, and there were a bunch of them built into Kirby's original run that didn't get fully fleshed out, and the ones that were retconned later got even more undefined, and subsequent writers noticed that a whole genetic predestination, the good ones are pretty, the bad ones have monster face thing was kinda inadvertently brushing up against some icky implications, so there's been some rewriting, and yeah, I get the sense there's a good reason the deviants are barely hinted at in the trailer, and the only one even rumored to show up so far is Crow, who has often been the main one and is a devil face guy who sometimes has a thing with Thena. I'm sure they're in there, monsters are good to have on hand, but my sense is that in the film the Eternals are going to end up fighting each other more than like a villain team, or maybe the Celestials are the full-on bad guys now. As for the aforementioned Black Knight, I have to wonder if Kit Harington isn't in the trailer much because he's only a small part, or if they just don't want people to recognize him and Richard Madden being in the same project again and talk more about Game of Thrones than the movie itself. Either way, it'd make some sense for him to be a human POV in this movie, that's otherwise about immortal, genetically engineered weirdos. Again, Black Knight is just a regular dude from modern times. His name is Dane Whitman. He's got himself a magic sword called the Ebony Blade, so he dresses up like a knight to do superhero stuff, and he typically rides a flying horse, which he sometimes timeshares with Valkyrie, so we might have already seen the horse at least in Endgame, maybe. In any case, this guy has been a fan favorite C-tier Marvel guy forever. He's been an Avenger a bunch of times. He got jumped back and forth to the Malibu Ultraverse at one point, and he's been a human love interest to Cersei to the point of joining her in Gen Joseon. That's like the Unimind, but it's the sexy version for only 2 people.
Grin, grin, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more.
Hubba, hubba.
So, superhuman almost got us, the regular dude, but he's got a magic sword, so he's doing his best. Maybe there's still something with this other guy, according to the trailer at least. I mean, that's a story. Hell, that's kind of the story, right? Like all the way back, Campbell, Young, Nietzsche, all that shit. And that's what the Eternals was in the comics. As for the movie, we got good guys, we got big stakes, maybe some bad guys, or maybe just the big stakes are the bad guys, and we've maybe got some basic idea of what a human interest storyline could be. So I imagine your next question is, okay, where does all this fit in with the other stuff? Well, that was also the question on the comic side when the series had ended unfinished and Kirby had left another publisher with a mountain of big weird sci-fi origin business floating in the ether of its continuity. And since this has already run a little long, I'll see you in part 2 to try and explain what happened next.
Oh, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times.
Who the hell are you guys?
I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.